Hello, this is Rami reporting for Reason to Resist here from Popayan, Colombia. I currently have Ivan Ernesto on this call with us, who is from Havana, Cuba. And recently, Trump came out with a statement saying that Cuba is ready to fall, and then a more recent statement from Marco Rubio as well, saying that he believes that Cuba is in a lot of trouble. So I think it's very grateful to have you on this call, Ivan, to tell us a bit about the perspective of the Cuban people around these escalations that the United States have been pushing in Latin America, more specifically in Venezuela, and their aggressive threats to Cuba in recent days.
Thank you very much, Rami, for having me. And a greeting to all the audience that also joined to your platform. Yeah, here from Cuba, we have it's very concerning. It's a very threatening situation, not only for Venezuela or Cuba, for the rest of the people, not even in the region of Latin America and the Caribbean, but also for the rest of the people around the world. The way the United States has been behaving uh, without taking into account um, any moral legal steps is very concerning for the people around the world. Just launching direct aggression against a sovereign nation, that's a violation of international law. Kidnap a president of a foreign country, that's another um, violation of international law. Everything that the United States has been doing in the last few months has been against any kind of moral or legal basis. So um, it's something that from Cuba we perceive as a definitely as a threat. We even had uh, 32 uh, comrades that died in the actions that were part of the staff that protected Maduro. That was part of a bilateral agreement in terms of the security. But it's not that we have a large army in Venezuela like the mass media, uh, more specifically the media and ideological apparatus of the anti-Cuban uh, um, mafia within Miami and also in other territories within the United States and in other territories in Europe. There were a very few Cubans that were as part of an agreement with the Venezuelan government, their homologs organization that were part of that security staff. And there's blood, Cuban blood, in those actions. Uh, and that's something that can be repeated in any other territory in Latin America. Even more if we take into account that the current Trump's administration have reassumed the Monroe Doctrine openly, explicitly in their security doctrine for the rest of their um, their administration. So it's very concerning. We have perceived it with a little disappointment in the way international organizations have reacted to this, in the way several governments, mostly European and the far right's government that have arisen in the last years in Latin America, supporting this kind of actions against the sovereignty and self-determination of the people in the region.
I mean, what happened in Venezuela sets a precedent, as you've mentioned. I mean, the United States have shown um, animosity and aggressiveness towards countries such as Iran, China. I mean, China would be maybe a lot more difficult to attempt such atrocities, but I mean, basically, the United States have set a new standard in the international community of how to regulate such grievances, and basically throwing international law completely out of the window and implementing what they've always used, which is rules-based order. Now we know what rules-based order consists of. But you've mentioned that the deafening silence or the complicity of far-right governments of Europe. But also, we look at Canada's statement. Canada has mentioned that Maduro was a dictator, that it paves the way for a better world, for a better future for Venezuela. And Denmark, I mean, Trump has been provoking Canada and Denmark as well. So in some way, their form of endorsement of Trump's actions in Venezuela could very likely bite them back into the ass in the future, considering Trump is pushing the Monroe Doctrine not just in the south of the U.S. border, but also in the north. How are Cubans currently reacting right now to the threats that America has been pushing towards Cuba? Right, I mentioned earlier the statements of Marco Rubio saying that, and Donald Trump saying that Cuba is ready to fall. What's the current mood or the current sentiment in Cuba?
Well, Cuba actually has been used to these kind of threats. There have been more than 10 administrations that in the last 65 plus years have attempted against the life of our political leaders, against the Cuban people and the revolutionary process. So right now, it's a very concerning and challenging scenario for Cuba. Also taking into account the situation right now that we are experiencing in Cuba regarding the economic crisis that we are facing, and in a different moment like than the very beginning of the revolution, where we were also alone, and the United States also tried to push direct intervention against the Cuban revolution. But right now we are ready. I mean, we know it's a very challenging moment. We know that we need a unified response to what it has been happening, not only from Cuba, not only from Venezuela, not only from the countries that are being threatened directly by the United States, but all the people that struggle for liberation and that look for an alternative to what the U.S. imperialism has decided to impose against our peoples. So I consider that, taking into account the current scenario, taking into account what has been happening in Palestine, taking into account what has been happening in Lebanon, Syria, Puerto Rico, Iran, Venezuela, and all these struggles that people are facing around the world, Congo, and etc. We need a response to that attitude. We cannot continue allowing with impunity what the United States and the U.S. imperialism and its Western allies to continue doing against our peoples.
You've mentioned that the Cuban people is ready, the Cuban government is ready. What does readiness look like?
Well, first of all, mobilization, understanding the situation that we are facing right now. As I mentioned to you, this is not the first time that we face a similar scenario. There is this threat of direct intervention, direct operation, like the one that they recently did with Venezuela. So, in terms of preparation, I cannot talk here on behalf of the Cuban government, but I assume that they have already started thinking about all this, but also from the mass movement, from the political organization, the civil society, Cuban civil society. We have to continue pushing forward the idea of the need of unity and pushing back these threats from the United States, and the expression of unity. If you continue, you know, like if you express some kind of weakness, U.S. imperialism will attack. That's the way they always has deal with our people. If they see any sign of weakness, they will act against you. There is even an anecdote that Fidel mentioned back in the 60s that was really associating a little like story with an animal uh, from the sea, that when they see that you are showing some kind of weakness, if you are like retreating to their threats, the instant when they attack. So we cannot show that weakness to U.S. imperialism, and even though the regional scenario could seem adverse to the progressive movement around the world, to the revolutionary forces around the world, Cuba will never step back.
And I think Cuba has shown that actually America is scared of demonstrations of strength. The Cuban Missile Crisis put America to its knees to a certain extent. This tiny island in the Caribbean Sea was able to push back America. You said 65 years of continuous aggression. But there's also almost 20 years of American provocation in Venezuela. Why is this timing so important right now? Why is America acting in 2026 to push the downfall, the collapse of Venezuela, and to push more atrocities in Cuba? I mean, it's been going on for decades. Why is the timing so important for 2026 here in January?
Well, I think this is related with certain variables, global variables, taking into account this transition into a multipolar world, the emergence of alternative powers like Russia and China, and the way geopolitical forces are reconfiguring the geopolitical forces around the world. So I think that the United States, in this period of um, uh, the sense of the power of the United States, technologically, militarily, etc. Even though it's still a big power, even though it's still one of the main powers around the world, but they perceive that they have to show some strength. They have perceived some kind of weakness, and the reaction sometimes in the history have proven that is through fascism, which is what we are seeing right now. This protective perspective from um, Trump's administration, that trying to, bring back the enterprises, the entrepreneurs, trying to put the interest of the America first. All this is related with this fascist accents of the fascist movement within the United States, but also in Europe. This narrative of the cultural battle that since more than 10 years has been going on here in Latin America, but also in the rest of the world, mostly Europe and the United States. The essence of figures or personalities like Bolsonaro, Milei, Trump, all that is an expression of these geopolitical changes that are taking place. Also, if you take into account domestic conditions that are uh, um, polarizing even more the American society, that also has been creating the scenario for the kind of narrative that are being accepted for a big part of the population, sadly, of the United States, with this populist discourse of the Trump's administration. But also that has an expression in foreign affairs, and they need for all this narrative to fulfill their national interest, to produce enough energy and control all the sources of energy in the region, but also taking control of the main maritime routes and aerial routes. So all of this is within the complexity of the scenario that we're facing right now, and why right now the Trump's administration have decided to take these kind of actions. And as I mentioned, it's not only with Venezuela right now, but also with the prior administration in Palestine, with Lebanon, Syria, Iran. All these countries were attacking one um, like wave of uh, offensive wave. So um, I don't think it's something that it will stop. It's something that a tendency that will continue, and that's why I think we need a strong response to this very violent, uh, very concerning steps that U.S. imperialism in this process of decay, in this process of distance or descent. I don't know the exact term, but decreasing its power worldwide. It will have this kind of expression also in Latin America and other regions that they consider should be under their control.
Right, the Monroe Doctrine calls the Western Hemisphere America's backyard. But you've mentioned you've mentioned the need for a strong response. Venezuela has some strong allies, Russia and China. First of all, the international community has been pretty silent, other than offering milquetoast words, and other countries in the West basically supporting the overthrow of the democratic government of Venezuela. But shouldn't we expect a bit more than simple words from Russia and China? I mean, we need a strong response. America has been given carte blanche into genociding people, the Palestinians in Gaza. With total impunity, they've attacked Iran and Lebanon, Yemen, kidnapped the president in Venezuela. This is not a threat to Venezuela, as you've mentioned. It's a threat to the self-determination and sovereignty of the entire world, to anyone who believes differently than the way America is governing. Showing moral decency gets you basically a death sentence from the Americans. What kind of response truly can we expect from the international community, from the allies of Cuba and Venezuela? I felt a bit abandoned in Palestine and Lebanon. What kind of support do you expect from the allies of Cuba and Venezuela?
Well, I think this is one of the most frustrating part of all this situation, isn't it? Um, of course, most of the people in the global south will consider that China and Russia should play a bigger role in all this situation to step back U.S. imperialism. But this is something that is related with their geopolitical interest. I mean, this is something that uh, even though Cuba could have, I don't know, some kind of influence in some sphere, political sphere in China or Russia, they will not get involved in this kind of direct um, uh, aggression with the United States. If, the same way the United States is trying to avoid direct conflict with these emerging powers, taking into account that they also have been heating up certain points like Ukraine, like Taiwan, that also the United States recently sent a shipment of weapons, new weapons for Taiwan, and that also increased the tension in all these areas, which are priorities for um, for these countries. In the case of Ukraine, even Trump has been dealing with Putin in order to get some benefits from the situation in Ukraine. So maybe in the geopolitical interest, Trump is doing this. This is giving this chance or exchanging Ukraine for Venezuela. So this might be theories that are going on, and this is high policy, something that will never be accepted in the media. So this is something that we cannot change from those who are in these emerging powers. We have to decide from the global south. I think that the reaction should be coming from the global south to oppose this threatening moment that the U.S. imperialism has been imposing against the peoples around the world.
So when you say global south, you're talking about countries outside of Russia and China. You're talking about your fellow comrades in Latin America and Africa and the Middle East.
We're talking to these developing countries that have been suffering the most from the capitalist relation, from the oppression of the United States, and not only the ones who have left wing government, but I'm talking about the people in each global South country are the one that can change, are the ones, even the people within the United States have an important role and responsibility to step back and generate some kind of pressure on the U.S. government to stop this madness.
So in some way, the non-aligned movement, right? I mean, it's a lot less powerful than it was historically, but we always remember the great support that the Cuban people, Fidel Castro, have offered to Namibia when they were struggling. And Fidel Castro has a famous quote where he says, "The only thing we want back from our corpses, the only thing we want back from Namibia in exchange for the liberation is the corpses of our fallen soldiers." So clearly, we need to come back to these times of people-to-people solidarity, global South to global South solidarity. And I think this is on a slightly different topic here. Just a week or so before the U.S. Kidnapped the Democratic President Nicolas Maduro, there were oil tankers heading towards Cuba that were intercepted. And it seemed like these oil tankers that Venezuela was shipping to Cuba played a strong lifeline to Cuba's energy security. Cuba, I believe, generates electricity through fuel combustion. I mean, can you tell us more about how will these events happening in Venezuela might impact Cuba's economy, Cuba's energy security, and just life in Cuba in general?
Yeah. Well, the system of unilateral um, coercive measures that the United States have been applying against Cuba and against Venezuela and against um, uh, other companies around the world with the extraterritorial application of the blockade against Cuba. It's something that we have been facing prior, even the um, the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, right now, this situation with the increasing tension with Venezuela and the aggression, the military aggression, and the kidnapping and piracy uh, deployments executed by the U.S. forces in the Caribbean, it will have an impact on the Cuban, not only the oil and energy security, but with all the impact that has, the comprehensive impact that this have in the rest of the economic sectors. Um, in the last years, Cuba has been trying to um, pluralize, try to uh, look for new partners. Some oil from Russia, from Mexico, from Venezuela, that also the production has decreased and the distribution or commercialization of oil to Cuba has decreased in the last years. So we have been already experiencing that lack of fuel, and not only with the unbalance of the of the shipping companies coming to Cuba and provide us with oil, but also the oil companies, also the shipping companies, also the ones who threat to bring to bring a fuel to Cuba, and all the enterprises related with that, financial, security, assured companies, all of that has been punished by the U.S. policy even before the COVID-19 pandemic. So right now, definitely, it will have an impact, sensitive impact, but it won't be as this mass media and Marco Rubio has been spreading out, that the only oil that we were surviving was with the Venezuelan one. That's not true anymore. But it's a bad precedent. This piracy policy that have been applying the American government against sovereign countries, trying to stop them to bring fuel to Cuba.
And the claims that legitimized, or the pretext, that's a better word, the pretext used by Trump to invade Venezuela was that Maduro was a narco trafficant who was flooding the United States with fentanyl, cocaine, God knows what. This is going to be a beautiful way to expose the fraud that is the U.S. Justice system, right? Because there's clearly no evidence, and I think it's safe to say that he'll be recognized as guilty. Because this is the state of the democratic nature of the United States. The United States,
all that, and sorry for the word, that's bullshit. All that is bullshit. The United States is an expert on building up justifications for their military operations. In the case of Cuba, I don't know if some of you remember the sonic attacks that was used by the Trump administration in order to pull back all the measures applied by the Obama administration in favor of normalization of the relation between Cuba and the United States. So they just made up. There is no any single evidence of Venezuela being a significant country from where drugs come to the United States. Even the vast majority of it comes through the Pacific, not the Caribbean. And it's even more contradictory on the top of this that they induct. I don't think that's the word in English. This Honduran ex-president that was actually sending exporting drugs to the United States, proved by an American jury with all the proof, all the evidence, and he just indulged it. It just release him and send him free because of geopolitical reasons in Honduras specifically.
Now, the claims against Cuba is that I believe Cuba is still listed as a state sponsor of terrorism.
Yeah.
Cuba is,
and soon we will be narco terrorists too.
But Trump also says that Cuba is undemocratic. I was able to go to Cuba. This is where we met, Ivan. And truly, I found an expression of democracy in Cuba that I've never seen anywhere else in the world, where people are invested into the democratic nature, the democratic life. In Canada, we vote once every 4 years, if you're lucky, if you want to. But in Cuba, I think people play like a much stronger role, right? There's like these committees behind these schools, these committees behind the communities, behind all these different initiatives, where Cubans are a lot more invested. Can you just take the time to tell us what claims the United States have against Cuba, or these pretexts, and tell us a bit about how they're false?
Well, there are a bunch of lies that historically that they have been spreading. The issue of human rights, free press, free speech, etc. Actually, and this is something that it would be good for you and the audience to know about, is that when the United first put Cuba in the list of countries that sponsored terrorism was during the 80s. when Cuba was supporting Angola against the apartheid and the guerrillas in certain countries in Latin America. So we were supporting freedom. We were supporting peoples against something so, so nefastus like apartheid, like colonialism, and they put us on that list because of the help, the assistance that we were providing to those movement for liberation. So since it's not something that I don't know, it's not something that um, that we maybe are proud of being in all this list that the United States unilaterally and arbitrarily made up. But it's something that we are not going to change that solidarity. We are not going to change that internationalism because the United States do not like it. Actually, we need more internationalism. We need more solidarity among the just causes around the world to stop this. So uh, the arguments that they are using are related with that. The support that we gave to certain movement, the also the word the art and there were several um, prisoners that the United States was looking for that were terrorists in the United States that Cuba provided political asylum, as well as the United States has held terrorists in their territories, like Posada Carriles. I mean, we don't have anyone that have generated a terrorist attack against an airplane or have committed any crime that has a huge civil impact within the United States or anywhere else. We have been supporting mass movement and national movement for liberation. Uh, that's something totally different to what Posada Carriles or Orlando Bosch. For those who are familiar with the Cuban history, that they kill civilians. They kill thousands, hundreds of civilians, and they operate within the orders of the CIA. So those are supposedly arguments that they will continue using, and they will create even other mores. And we don't care about that. We will continue dismantling all these arguments, and definitely it's not something that we will give some credit to them.
Cuba's internationalism, I believe, is probably the most inspiring uh, form of solidarity I was ever able to witness in history. So big kudos to the Cuban people. And just maybe like a little word for the to end this interview, Ivan, is just coming back to the statement from Trump saying that Cuba is ready to fall. How would you use this moment, this little moment to end this interview with? How would you respond to that?
Well, as I mentioned before, there have been several times that maximum leader of the American government has said something similar. It won't be the last time. They will continue considering and underestimate the Cuban people, the capacity of resistance of the Cuban people, and the way we have been organizing and mobilizing against the American intervention and their hostility against Cuba. So right now, even though the very sensitive context that Cubans are facing, we still uh, have hope. We still consider and can point out who is the actual enemy who has been trying to damage the Cuban people for even before the triumph of the Cuban Revolution throughout the history of the confirmation of the Cuban nationality, the one that has been behind uh, threats and trying to annexate, trying to undermine, trying to colonize the Cuban territory and undermine the Cuban people has been always the American government. And we make this distinction with the American people, which is something very important because we have very good friends in the United States that are struggling against not only this kind of policy towards Cuba, but against all the peoples around the world that the United States is actively oppressing.
Mm-hmm. Even within their own territory, thinking about the minorities, the migrants, the Black Solidarity movement that has been struggling under the hands of this oligarchy for decades.
Their Aboriginal communities.
Aboriginals, of course. And Cuba has been a country that always thrived for peace, but has been able to defend their country ferociously throughout history. And I believe we can maybe end this with this Cuban quote over here: "Hasta la victoria siempre. Venceremos."
I hope to see you soon again in Cuba, Rami, and maybe we can make a second cap of this streaming.
Of course, I'm trying my best to finish my business that I have here in Colombia, and then I'll be on the first flight to Cuba and be there with in total solidarity with the Cuban people in the face of neo-colonialism and blatant aggression. Thank you very much, Ivan.
Thanks to you, and thanks to the audience also for being here in your platform.
Thank you.